Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to the Doing What Matters podcast. It's great to have you back again this week. And we are going to have another great conversation with a friend of mine. We've become friends over the past couple of years. Her name is Kathy Brown, and we're just going to hear a little bit of her story about how life has shifted for her through her rhythms and routines and behaviors and habits to doing what matters. So, Kathy, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Teresa. It's fun to be here.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. Kathy and I are in a mastermind together. Those of you who listen to the podcast know that many times the guests that I have on are people that I've met through other communities and networking. And so Kathy and I are both a part of a mastermind with a friend of ours, Mike Kim. You've heard me talk about him on the podcast as well. And that's how we've met. We've done some travel together and had some great experiences together. But I want you to get to know Kathy in a little bit different way through her story. And so, Kathy, I'm just going to kind of dive right in because I want people to know what you're doing and how you got to this place of someone that I hear in your story that there were some pivotal points where you had to say, what matters to me? And how do I want to do life differently? So, take us back, if you would, and just kind of tell us what you might have been doing 10 years ago, because I know 10 years is kind of your number.
10
So
years is
let's
my
go back
number.
about 10 years ago. Tell us what that story is and then how something shifted for you, and just take us through that journey.
All right, I would love to. So, 10 years ago, I was a special education supervisor. I had worked in that field of special education leadership for at that point 20 some years.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved what I did. I worked largely in the area of supporting staff. I did not have staff that had direct, they were not teachers, they were consultants. And I really enjoyed the work. There were opportunities for systems building and process, and those are two of my favorite areas. And I was having the time of my life. And then sometimes life intervenes. And the intervention for me was both of my parents had dementia
Mm-hmm.
at the same time. And after a journey of several fairly stressful years, we eventually had to move them out of their home, my brother and I. So when I did that, there had been a change in leadership where I was working, and I was feeling at that point that I was not doing anything well. I was not doing the things that I wanted to for my parents or I felt was necessary, trying to sell their home and take care of financial matters. And then I felt torn because then I felt I wasn't putting my all into my job.
Mm-hmm.
So I was at a crossroads. And the crossroads for me was is I felt I had to decide what was the highest priority and the best way to accomplish what I felt was important. So with a fairly short notice, I resigned from my job in education and focused on my parents for a short term. And then I'd always had the idea that I wanted to coach and work with adults and small business owners because I love systems and processes. And many
You can
people, their eyes
see,
glaze over.
yeah, I mean, you can see why we're friends because Kathy and I
Yes.
have a lot of similarities of our loves. So you love systems and processes, and that seemed to, how did that lead into what you were talking about?
So what so I've always had a 10-year goal. So I was always looking forward 10 years into the future. So actually, when I came to the point that I felt like I needed to make the change, I knew where I wanted to be in 10 years. So really what I did is I accelerated that move. So
Mm-hmm.
I left education a few years sooner than planned and embarked on my own business and kind of explored and went from there, which then changed, of course, dramatically my 10-year goal because I implemented it sooner, which is really the point of I like 10 years, but it's really a long term goal. If you can get at least three,
Mm-hmm.
five, then you're in a good place. And the thing with that is it's a bit of like a North Star. It's not as concrete as a goal we write shorter term. Because in this case, I fulfilled part of my 10-year goal years before I had planned, which then prompted me to have to rethink where I wanted to be in 10 years because the trajectory of my life, I took a hard right-hand turn.
Yeah. And I think I don't want to miss that part of you saying, I had to come to a decision. I had to discern what what mattered to me.
Yeah,
And that accelerated because you had done the work of some forward thinking. You knew where you wanted to be in your 50s, 60s, kind of a general, like, here's what I think.
right.
You were able to go, okay, I can still do that. And but this matters to me right now in this current state to say, no, my parents, their health, their care matters. I can still get to this goal by just doing this little right hand turn right here and to do,
Yep.
do what matters in the moment and the presence you had in that moment to set aside the career that you thought might go a little bit longer than you had planned. So you mentioned 10-year goals, and I know that is kind of a lot of the work you do with people is this longer term goal setting idea. And I want to
Yes.
explore with you because we do some of the same things. We don't call it goal. And I know I was listening back to an interview you had just done with our friend Mike on his podcast, and he kind of has the same resistance I do to the word goal. And that was part of what I had to figure out how to frame long term thinking
Hmm.
without the word goal. So we call them areas of focus in your life and write, statements around those areas to say, much like you talk about in your work, yeah, where do I want to be, with my finances, with my career, with my relationships in the next 3, 5, 10 years? Talk to me a little bit though about why you have found that 10 years is maybe where we want to be. That's that long-term imagination piece. But we really may not be able to get there yet. We may have to work more at a 3-year or 5-year. Explore that with our listeners.
So a long-term goal creates a certain amount of attention for us. If it's so easy to just go day by day. So we're getting through today, we're getting through this week, we're getting through, again, we are looking very short term in front of us. What is the next thing?
Mm-hmm.
And that is life and that's real. A longer term view, especially when you go out 10 years, creates a tension between the now and where we want to go. Because
Mm,
it's easy to lose sight of where we're headed because we're just busy doing where we are today. And so it's really all it is it's a North Star, really,
yeah.
because the question really is then if I do this, if I engage in this, if I take this decision, if I buy this house, am I moving closer to or further from the life that I want to be living in 10 years?
Mm,
And that's really what it is.
yeah. So great statement right there. I often say that's tweetable, even though I don't do Twitter, right? So say that again. It's a North Star, and
Yes.
then that we're moving towards something. Say, kind of repeat what you said there. Just
So it functions as a North Star. So it's an anchoring point in the sense that when we are in the moment and we're deciding, excuse me, if we're going to do this, take this opportunity, purchase this thing, and move to this location, the question is that action that we're considering going to move us closer to or further from that North Star or the
mm,
life we want to lead 10
the
years from now?
life we want to lead 10 years from now. There's so much to explore there, as coaches, right? As to why we wouldn't have a North Star, why we wouldn't do those things. What is causing us to not want to look that far ahead? Um, and it is, I believe, and I'd love your thoughts on this, Kathy. It's kind of a skill we have to learn, or I don't know if skill's the right word. I don't know what you would call it, but it's a habit, it's a behavior because we're really not taught to do this well in our childhood or young adult life. We are very much taught to, work in weeks or months or uh, we lose. And I think I heard you say this on the podcast with Mike, we lose our imagination.
We do. When we're young, we're naturally curious. And you think of young kids who ask why. You answer and they say, why again? And then why again? And it kind of drives you nuts. Or that you can give them a cardboard box or a bunch of refrigerator dishes, plastic refrigerator dishes, and they can entertain themselves for long periods of time. They are curious and they have imagination.
Mhm.
The number of times that a young child is told no by the time they're like into kindergarten, and again, frequently for good reason, is an incredible number. And what happens is then we get into the world of being, let's be realistic. We have to be realistic. Well, and there is a place for realistic, but in the process of it between, and school doesn't always help, we kind of lose our skill of curiosity and imagination. They
Mhm.
are skills, they're like muscles. If we exercise them, they are stronger. And yet, as adults, typically by the time we're into high school, we're not so much into curiosity and imagination. People are telling
Well,
us to
we
be
want to
realistic.
fit, right? We want to stay in the norm of what everybody else is. It's why I so much believe in like music or some type of outside activity. And I taught music for years when my kids were growing up. I had a music studio in my home, but I could see that the music helped the curiosity stay. And I look back
Yes.
now over kids that I taught. I still live in the same local community, and what they're achieving and what they're doing and how they're living their lives is so different than, so if you're listening and you've got young kids, get them into things that keep that curiosity alive, because we
Hmm.
do lose it as adults. I find that with so many, even business owners. You and I both coach a lot of small business owner people, and that ability to think outside the box and say, if nothing was in your way,
Right.
what do you want your business and your life to look like 10 years from now? Where would you be living? How would you be living? I heard you talk on Mike's podcast about, planning out the kind of house that you want to be. I'm in a remodel project right now, Kathy, and I'm like, wow, this is what I envisioned that I would want to have. I want to have a master suite with a walk-in closet and a shower and my laundry right there and all those things. But I had to start thinking about that 10 years ago and
Right.
envisioning that. So walk us through
It
that process a little bit of what that is, that 10-year goal process.
So it really is beginning to answer, who do we want to be? What do we want to do? And what do we want to have? So it's be, do, and have. And honestly, the being comes first. Even though sometimes we feel we need to get ready for something, I need to get ready before I step into whatever it is that I want to be. And generally, we just have to dive in. So it's really thinking it's thinking into the future. And what do we want our life to look like? What does it look like? What does it feel like? Where are we living geographically? What does our house look like? Who are we spending time with? How often do we vacation? So it's really going through components of our life. In fact, I just did a series that I'm going to repackage and put out again on my email list, which is really tips to creating your long term goal. So it's
Mm-hmm.
the different kind of questions. I found if I ask myself questions, it prompts my thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Because when someone first said to me, well, what is the ideal home you want? My reaction was, I like the house I'm in. And I had to learn that there's a difference between contentment. So, contentment is being satisfied with what we have and being grateful and seeing what we want next.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's really the power of gratitude. And
Mm-hmm.
then, kind of like, all right, so if I were to tweak it, make it a little better, what might that look like? When
Mm-hmm.
I started the journey, I had to do it very concretely, which is why I started with a house and I started with a wardrobe because I could not wrap my sense of imagination and considering possibilities was so weak that I had to start with something concrete. And I literally started with the house I was living in and said, what would I change about this house? And that's where I started. So if it doesn't come naturally to you, all I want to say is don't give up on yourself.
Yeah.
Like pick something, maybe the vehicle you want to drive. And then you
Well,
get
and I
into
think
what's the color.
people that resist, long-term goal planning, sometimes, as you and I work with clients that we have, or if you're listening and you're in this seat, we're like, I'm content. Like I feel like I've done. And you use two words that, so we don't get very excited about, like, okay, you and I are both um in this kind of second half of life season. And so you can say, oh gosh, I've accomplished, I've done some things, I've had a great career in some different areas, and I love what I'm doing, I love helping others. But you mentioned two words. You're either building towards an experience or leaving a legacy. Can you say more about kind of like, why would I want a long-term goal when I'm already 60 and I think about the next 20 years of my life? So many people get to our season of life and go,
Mhm.
I'm going to retire. I'm going to sit back. And the thought of retiring and sitting in my chair and eating bonbons and watching Oprah, no offense to either one of those things,
Right.
just scares me to death to be in that place. So, how do I lean into the long term of an experience or a legacy and discover some of that?
So it is curiosity, and it's the willing to consider possibilities. The other thing we need to pay attention to is we can be complacent. So when we are complacent, we are satisfied with what we have, and that at the end. Contentment is I'm grateful, I love where I am, and there are more things I want to be, do, and have. So it's really realizing that it's going to continue to shift. Again, we were talking before this started that there are some physical things that perhaps are not as easy as they were at one point in our lives when we were younger. So you just kind of start redefining what that looks like.
Mhm, mhm,
I revisit my 10-year goal periodically. It's not I don't have a specific schedule, but there'll come a time as I'm reviewing it, usually at least once a month, for sure once a quarter, that I'll go, "Ooh, there's some things I'm learning. There's maybe some new things that I'm trying, or wow, I've not done anything to move in that direction." And
mhm,
those are just things that we can ask ourselves questions.
mhm,
Whatever question we ask ourselves, our brain is wired to give us an answer. So when we say something like, well, what more can I do? What is the legacy I want to leave? When we ask ourselves those high quality questions, our brain is wired to help us find the answer.
mhm,
So that's why I use so much questioning to prompt my own thinking around where do I want to go in the future.
mhm. Yeah, I love that. Our brain is, wired to figure it out, to help us
Yes.
figure it out. I'll give an example in my own story. One of my areas of focus is travel and recreation. So I call them area of focus, and they really are. Then we write these things we call I am statements. So I'm looking out, 5, 10 years saying, what would if I had to write it like it was already happening, I am doing this. And
Hmm.
over time, I've rewritten that statement every 2 to 3 years, probably, because I've gotten to that place and I'm going to the next. And in travel and recreation, it's been things like my husband and I are traveling this many weeks out of the year, vacationing, enjoying hobbies together. So then I have to back that down, right? To go, okay, what hobbies
Right.
do we want to explore now that we might be doing then? Are we vacationing? I think I started with 2 weeks. Getting my husband off the farm is hard. And so 2 weeks. And then I wanted to go 3 weeks. Then I wanted to go 4 weeks. And that's that long term. And when I reach that, then I'm pushing it a little bit more because it's part of the legacy and experience I want to have in the next 20 years. I want to be going somewhere on a regular basis and spending long periods of time. Either, I think I heard you mention you love to go to Europe. That's on
Mhm.
my
Yeah.
bucket list. That's in my travel and recreation experiences. But I have to do some things now to prepare for those things. So once you have that 10-year goal or 5-year goal or long-term goal, how do you, Kathy, walk people through breaking that down into, okay, to get to there, I got to do this, this, and this? What's your process?
Well, you're going to go to a shorter one, but rather you're going to like a 3-year or a 5-year or something, but you're going more than a year, generally more than two or at least two, and less than the 10. And what I'm finding is that a lot of times what that number is ties to where that person is. So for right now, I changed mine to 3
Mm-hmm.
because given my age, I think things might be pretty different at 5. I think I 3 is going to look different. So this is the first time that I've had my kind of intermediate step as close to the
Mm,
present, and it's because of where I am in my life. I
right.
find people that if they think they're going to have kids at a certain time, if they plan to retire at a certain time, if their kids are going to graduate from high school at a
Yeah.
certain time. If so sometimes that shorter term in between is when there's some sort of other change in our life. So there's a natural point that we're going to be questioning or we have different opportunities. Once the kids graduate from high school, generally parents have different opportunities.
Well, I think that's so important to look at those monumental places in our life and say, okay, I have a goal. For my husband and I, I've always wanted us to travel or have not necessarily a second home, but a location we like to go to and return
Mhm.
to. That's important to me. It's important for us to get off the farm at different times for periods of time. But, we weren't going to do that when our daughter was still in high school.
Right.
And so I knew there was a season of waiting for that to happen. But I think we really want to look at those monumental places and have that be the shorter term. Here's where I want to be, but here's what's realistic between now and then that I can break down into a shorter term goal. Even remodeling my home, I've always known I wanted to remodel it at some point, but it wasn't realistic when our daughter was still living at home to take over
Right.
her bedroom and make it a master suite. She kind of would have really wondered where she was going to sleep, right?
Yeah.
So,
She may have objected to that.
yeah, she might have objected. So we do have to take into account, the shorter term and how we're going to do it and when we're going to do it. Um, but not losing sight of the legacy piece, the experiences that we still have to have, but you know, in what do I want to experience in the next 10 years? I like you. I'm looking at, we were talking before we started recording. I have a lot of travel I'd like to do in the next 10 years because maybe at 75 to 80, I hope I'm still able to travel really well, but I also want to be realistic of what's important right now. And I may be in a
Right.
different season with grandkids or whatever that I want to stay home more in a different season because they're involved in things. So it's the balance, the harmony is a better word that I like of long term with short term. Uh,
Mhm.
in that place. So I know you have some ways that you work with people around these long-term goals. What are some resources that you have, Kathy, and some ways that people can connect with you? Because this is really a specialty. I've enjoyed reading your blogs and writing. You just have such a niched way of seeing this that I just love how that's come to be for you. So, what are some resources that you have that people can get in touch with you around?
Well, I have a website. On the website, there is a link to a free lead magnet, and it's creating your 10-year goal. And
Mhm,
it just kind of starts you with different questions and things to consider when you're starting to look out.
mhm.
Also, I have an email list. It's 2 emails a week. I don't really send a huge amount
They're
of emails,
great emails, though. They're personal. I love knowing you and your story.
and frequently they're video. I usually do
Mhm.
short videos. And that is a great way that I offer tips. A lot of it is around the 10-year goals. Some of it is systems and process work, which represents some of the businesses I'm working with. And some of it is just life. One
Yeah,
email a week is called On My Mind, and it's whatever is literally on
it
my
is.
mind that
It's
week.
great. I love that one. And remind us again, what's the name of your website? Where can they find that website?
The website is goalfirm.com. So GOALFIRM, all one word. It's the name of my business.com.
Say
And
goalfirm.com. We'll have it in the show notes, but it's pretty simple, pretty easy to find her. I definitely recommend getting that download. One other thing that I want to ask you before we hop off, because we talk so much, and I know you've made that major life shift from, um, being in the education system, supervising there, and working with kids around setting their goals and then going, wow, if I'm helping to write these for kids and their, IEPs and some of those types of things, how am I applying this to my own life? I love that story of how you do that. But just in your last On My Mind email, you talked about tiny habits, behaviors, some of these things. And I love to ask my guests, just as you've made this shift to doing what matters, what's something very practical in the last week or so that you're like, wow, this came up for me and I could have done this, but because I'm very clear on my 10-year goals and what matters to me, I knew that might rabbit trail me or take me somewhere else. What's something you could share with our audience that you're like, this for me was something in my life that was just a decision that I made to stay on track?
So here's a good one. For me, I really this year I'm prioritizing relationships, and 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 I'm busy. I have a calendar. I'm usually scheduled out several weeks ahead. And my brother called and said, "Oh, I forgot. I have an appointment down there, so I'm going to be at your house Wednesday afternoon, and I'm going to stay through the weekend. Is that okay?" Now, a year or so ago, my answer would have been probably a yes, but a bit of a grouchy yes, to be perfectly honest. And instead, now it was like, nope, got it. Yep, there's a couple things I can't move. Here's what I'm going to move. That whole thing of that vision of who I want to be in the future and understanding that my best self in the future, I want to behave that way today,
So,
led me to saying, yeah, come on down, see if, my niece would come too. And yeah, we'll have some fun and make some memories.
such a good one. People matter. And just
People
the
matter.
awareness that they do. Yeah, that's such a good one because so many of are faced with that of like somebody shows up and goes, can you do lunch? And you're like, eh. And then you're like, what could be more important than
Right.
that? If at all possible, right? If at all
Right.
possible. And you and I have talked about this leaving room for that to be. And you said I was able to move some, not everything, and they're going to understand, and you're going to have a great time. Uh,
Yep.
so that's a great one, and I think so practical of just if I say this matters, and this is
Hmm.
what my long-term life wants to be. How am I practicing and doing that? So I love the work Kathy does. It so aligns with so much that we talk about here on the Doing What Matters podcast. And I wanted you to meet her. I wanted you to get to know her. Make sure you get on her email list. You will love both of her emails. I love the one of On My Mind. I think it's such a great title and such a great thing. And make sure you check out her website, get that free download. You are going to love just that. If you're a small business owner, Kathy might be someone that could really help you uh, in that area of just those long-term plannings. And we didn't even talk about it today on the process or on the podcast, but her ability to put together systems and processes. Yeah, she's someone that I would highly recommend to help you do those things in your business. We'll give you more margin, more room to do what matters. So, Kathy, thanks for joining me today in a brief conversation. We could have spent a long time chatting today,
Yeah.
but thanks for being my guest.
Thanks, Teresa. This was great fun. I appreciate it.
Oh, well, I appreciate you, friend. And come back with us next week. Listen in to Doing What Matters podcast. Remember that every ordinary day has an extraordinary moment. You just have to look for them. We'll see you next week on the podcast.